In a dense and dangerous forest, a man in an expensive suit abandons his 6-year-old daughter, shivering with fever, in territory known to harbor wild tigers. The child, barely able to stand due to the flu consuming her, looks at her father with pleading eyes, without understanding why he brought her to such a frightening place, and ends up fainting right there. Minutes after the cruel abandonment, the threatening roar of a hungry tiger echoes through the forest. The feline emerges from the shadows with sharp fangs exposed, approaching the defenseless girl who trembles with fever and terror. When the animal is about to pounce, a horse that heard the roar appears, and realizing that the child was on the ground, about to be attacked, decides to make the riskiest decision of its life. Before, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thank you. Let's get back to our story. The air was so heavy, you could almost touch it. On that suffocating afternoon, where the scent of damp earth mingled with the sweet, disturbing aroma of decaying leaves, Edward Vance adjusted the knot of his designer tie as he glanced into the rearview mirror. His eyes, cold as ice, met the reflection of a small girl in the back seat of his black Mercedes. Sophia was only 6, but she seemed even smaller curled against the beige leather of the seat. Her breathing was shallow, interrupted by the fever that had consumed her for 3 days. Her brown hair clung to her sweaty forehead, and her large eyes, so much like his own, Edward thought with discomfort, watched him with a trust that deeply unnerved him. "Daddy, I'm thirsty," she murmured, her weak voice echoing in the silence of the luxury car. Edward didn't respond. Instead, he accelerated down the dirt road that led into the heart of the Blackwood National Forest. Every turn brought him closer to his final destination, a location he had meticulously researched for weeks. His investigation had been thorough. Discreet conversations with local hunters, consultations of detailed wilderness maps, even contacts with underworld figures who knew the region's most dangerous corners. The forest closed in around them like a green, menacing curtain. Entwined branches formed a canopy so dense that even in that late afternoon, sunlight barely penetrated. The sound of the engine was muffled by the vegetation, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere that made Sophia's heart beat even faster. "Where are we going, Daddy?" The question came out in a whisper, loaded with an innocence that cut Edward like a blade. He remembered the previous week, when Monica had appeared in his office. His ex-girlfriend was unrecognizable, too thin, with deep circles under her eyes and trembling hands that betrayed a sickness consuming her from within. She held Sophia by the hand, and the child looked at him with curiosity mixed with the fear of the unknown. "This is your daughter, Edward," Monica had said, tears streaming freely down her pale cheeks. "I can't take care of her anymore. The doctors say I only have a few months left. Please be the father she deserves." Edward had accepted the child at that moment, not out of compassion, but by quickly calculating how the situation might affect his reputation. Newly married to Eleanor, daughter of one of the city's most influential families, he couldn't allow scandals to tarnish his social ascent. His real estate development company was on the verge of signing multi-million-dollar contracts, and his public image was crucial for these deals. But as the days passed, Sophia's presence in his home became increasingly unbearable. The girl was sick, tearful, and constantly asked for her mother. Eleanor had made it clear she wouldn't raise that woman's child, and arguments at home became increasingly intense. The car finally stopped in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient trees whose trunks were so thick that 3 men, linked arm in arm, couldn't span their circumference. Edward turned off the engine, and the silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of wildlife, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and something deeper and more menacing that made the hairs on one's arms stand on end. Sophia tried to sit up straighter, but the fever made her dizzy. "Daddy, can I have some water? It's really hot here." Edward got out of the car without answering and walked to the back door. When he opened it, the hot, humid forest air invaded the vehicle's air-conditioned interior. Sophia held out her arms to him, expecting to be carried like any child would by their father. For a moment, just a moment, Edward hesitated. The girl's eyes glowed with fever and absolute trust. She truly believed he was there to care, for her, to protect her. The innocence of that gaze was almost unbearable. But then he thought of Eleanor, of his business, of everything he had to lose. With mechanical movements, Edward lifted Sophia into his arms and set her down on the clearing floor. The girl stumbled, her weak legs barely able to support her. "Daddy!" Her voice was confused, scared. Edward returned to the car without looking back. The engine roared back to life, powerful and indifferent to the human drama unfolding. As the Mercedes drove away, kicking up a cloud of red dust, Sophia finally understood what was happening. Her desperate cries echoed through the empty forest, a sound that blended with the distant roar of something much larger and much more dangerous approaching. The silence that followed the car's departure was more terrifying than any noise. Sophia remained motionless in the center of the clearing, her small hands trembling not only from the fever, but from the fear that was beginning to consume her. Fragile body, the forest shadows seemed to move around her, creating shapes that her childish imagination transformed into monsters. She called out again, "Daddy!" Her voice echoed among the trees and returned to her like a cruel whisper. Reality began to infiltrate her 6-year-old mind. He had really left. He had left her alone in that terrifying place where the air smelled of decay and danger. The fever made her vision ripple as if she were looking through water. Sophia tried to take a few steps in the direction where the car had disappeared, but her legs gave out and she fell to her knees onto the damp leaves. The ground was soft and cold, covered by a thick layer of organic matter that released an earthy, heavy odor. Meanwhile, just 200 yards away, amidst the dense vegetation, a pair of yellow eyes watched every movement of the child. The tiger had detected the scent of vulnerability long before the car arrived. It was an adult male, over 400 pounds of muscle and predatory instinct honed by days without a substantial kill. It wasn't a native creature of the Blackwood National Forest, a massive Bengal tiger, likely an escapee from a private exotic animal collection or a poorly secured roadside zoo. Its presence was a hushed and terrifying rumor among the park rangers and local hunters. The beast had learned to associate the sound of human vehicles with opportunities. Sometimes careless tourists left food behind or injured animals were abandoned, but this time was different. The smell in the air wasn't of discarded food. It was the sweet, tempting aroma of young, defenseless prey. Sophia tried to stand. Again, but dizziness made her sway. She leaned against the trunk of a nearby tree, feeling the rough bark scratch her delicate skin. "Mommy," she murmured, remembering the thin woman who had handed her over to the man she thought was her savior. The memory of Monica was confused, mixed with images of hospitals and the constant smell of medicine. The tiger began to move. Its steps were silent, each paw placed with calculated precision on the carpet of leaves. Its muscles contracted and relaxed in a hypnotic rhythm, preparing for the right moment to strike. Experience had taught it that young prey were easier, but also that humans could be unpredictable. Sophia's breathing became more erratic. The fever was worsening, and she felt as if the world was melting around her. Colors blended, and the sounds of the forest amplified until they became deafening. The birdsong sounded like screams, the wind in the leaves like menacing whispers. It was then that she heard it, a low, deep sound that seemed to come from the very center of the earth, a roar that chilled her blood and made her most primitive instincts scream in alarm. Sophia turned slowly, and through the haze of her fever, she saw the imposing silhouette emerging from the shadows. The tiger was magnificently terrifying. Its black stripes contrasted with the vibrant orange of its coat, and its muscles rippled under its skin with every movement. But it was the eyes that completely paralyzed her, two yellow orbs that studied her with a cold, calculating intelligence. The beast stopped just 30 feet away, lowering its head slightly as it assessed its prey. Sophia was small, clearly sick, and presented no threat. The tiger could feel the fear emanating from her like a perfume, and this further sharpened its predatory instincts. Sophia tried to retreat, but her back was already against the tree trunk. There was nowhere to run. Her small hands clutched the rough bark as she watched, hypnotized by terror, the predator preparing to attack. "Please," she whispered, a word lost in the warm afternoon wind. She didn't know if she was begging for clemency from the animal or from the father who had abandoned her in that terrible place. The tiger took another step forward, its muscles tensing like coiled springs. Its fangs, white and sharp as daggers, were exposed as it slightly opened its mouth. The animal's breath was visible in the humid air, creating small clouds that quickly dissipated. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, as she used to do during nightmares, hoping that when she opened them, everything would be nothing more than a bad dream. But the tiger's growls remained real, closer and closer, echoing through her bones like thunder. The musky scent of the predator reached her, mixed with the metallic odor that preceded violence. Sophia could feel the animal's massive presence, approaching the heat of its body, the deadly force contained in each movement. It was in this moment of utter despair that another sound cut through the forest air. The pounding of hooves against the earth with urgency, accompanied by a loud, defiant whinny that made the tiger pause and turn its head. Something was coming. Something large, fast, and determined that would completely change the fate of that terrible afternoon in the forest. Storm was a majestic white horse, 16 years old, with a heart that beat with the accumulated wisdom of a life dedicated to work and love. He belonged to Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe Miller, a modest farming couple who lived on the outskirts of the forest. That afternoon, the animal was returning from his daily grazing when his sharp ears caught the sounds of danger coming from the clearing. The horse's instinct was immediate and inexplicable. During all those years living near the forest, Storm had learned to distinguish the different calls of local predators. He knew the sounds of the mountain lions and bobcats that roamed these woods, but that specific roar, deep, powerful, and laden with lethal intent, was clearly that of a tiger on the hunt. Without hesitation, Storm changed direction and galloped towards the danger. His hooves pounded against the earth with a determination that echoed like war drums. Low branches whipped his body, but he ignored them completely, focused only on the terrifying sound that intensified with every stride. Sophia opened her eyes when she heard the approaching hooves. Through her fever-blurred vision, she saw a white shape emerging from the vegetation like a benevolent ghost. The horse was immense, its mane rippling in the wind of its own speed, and its dark eyes shone with an intelligence and determination that surprised her. The tiger had also noticed the approach. Its head turned completely towards the new sound, and a low, menacing growl rumbled in its throat. Predators like it didn't like interference, especially when easy prey was already within reach. Storm burst into the clearing like a force of nature. Without slowing down, he positioned himself between Sophia and the tiger, rearing on his hind legs and emitting a loud, defiant whinny that reverberated throughout the forest. It was a sound laden with courage and protection, speaking a universal language understood by all animals, The tiger instinctively recoiled. Although a born predator, it was also intelligent enough to assess risks. An adult horse on high alert represented a real threat. Its hooves could break bones, and its body mass was considerable. Furthermore, there was something in that animal's posture that suggested an unusual determination. Sophia watched the scene with a mixture of terror and fascination. The white horse moved with a warrior's grace, its nostrils flared and muscles tensed, ready to defend that unknown child with its own life. It was as if a higher power had sent a four-legged angel to save her. The confrontation lasted long, tense seconds. The tiger circled the clearing, testing Storm's defenses, looking for an angle of attack. But the horse moved with it, always keeping Sophia protected behind its sturdy body. His eyes never left the predator, and his posture clearly communicated that he was prepared to fight to the death if necessary. Finally, the tiger made its decision. With a roar of frustration and fury, it lunged at Storm. The attack was swift and brutal, sharp claws extended, seeking the horse's flanks, while powerful fangs tried to find the vulnerable neck. Storm reacted with the speed of one who had faced similar dangers before. He dodged the main attack, but one of the tiger's paws managed to reach his left front leg, leaving 3 deep gashes that immediately began to bleed. The pain was intense, but the horse completely ignored it. In retaliation, Storm quickly spun and delivered a powerful kick with his hind legs. The impact struck the tiger on the side, sending it several feet back and eliciting a roar of pain. And surprise, the predator rolled on the ground, stunned by the force of the blow. Sophia watched the battle with wide eyes, her small hands covering her mouth to muffle the screams of terror that wanted to escape. Blood flowed from Storm's leg, dripping onto the dry leaves, but the horse remained firm in its protective stance. The tiger slowly got up, shaking its head to clear the dizziness. Its yellow eyes now gleamed not only with hunger, but with rage. No prey had offered so much resistance before. Its predatory nature demanded it persist, but its intelligence began to calculate whether the fight was worth it. Storm didn't wait for the next charge. With a whinny that sounded like a war cry, he advanced on the tiger, his front hooves raising, dangerously. The movement was so sudden and aggressive that the predator instinctively recoiled. It was at this moment that something changed in the dynamic of the confrontation. The tiger, accustomed to being the hunter, suddenly found itself in the position of being hunted. The unwavering determination of that horse, combined with its willingness to fight wounded, communicated to the predator that this battle could cost it far more than any prey was worth. With one last roar of frustration, the tiger retreated to the safety of the dense forest. Its steps became more cautious, and soon its striped form disappeared into the green shadows, leaving only the echo of its menacing presence. Storm remained alert for several minutes, his ears attentive to any sound that might indicate the predator's return. Only when he was certain that the danger had truly passed did he allow himself to relax slightly and turn to the girl he had saved. Sophia was huddled against the tree, trembling violently. She didn't know if it was from the fever, the terror she had just experienced, or the overwhelming gratitude she felt for that magnificent animal who had risked its life to protect her. The silence that followed the tiger's departure was different from before. It was no longer laden with threat, but with a fragile and precious peace. Storm slowly approached Sophia, limping slightly due to the injuries on his leg. Each step was calculated and gentle, as if he understood that the child had been through a trauma that went far beyond the encounter with the predator. Sophia looked up to meet the horse's deep, compassionate gaze. There was something in those dark eyes that reassured her in a way she couldn't explain. It was as if Storm could see through her childlike soul and understood not only her immediate fear, but all the pain of abandonment she carried in her heart. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice still trembling. She extended a small, hesitant hand towards the horse, unsure if he would allow contact. Storm lowered his majestic head to the girl's level, allowing her tiny fingers to touch his forehead. His coat was soft and warm, and Sophia felt an immediate and inexplicable connection with the being who had appeared like a miracle in her most desperate moment. For years, caring for Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe's farm, Storm had developed a special instinct for recognizing need and vulnerability. The elderly couple often received visits from neighbors' grandchildren, children from the rural community who came to spend seasons on the farm. Storm had learned to be gentle with the little ones, to identify when they were scared or needed comfort. But there was something different about Sophia. A fragility that went beyond her age, a deep sadness that shouldn't exist in the eyes of a 6-year-old. The horse could sense that she had been wounded in a way that left no visible marks, but was perhaps more painful than any physical injury. Sophia tried to stand up, but her legs were still too weak. The fever continued to consume her energy, and the recent terror had exhausted her last reserves. She stumbled and almost fell again, but Storm reacted instinctively, positioning his body to serve as support. "I'm sick," she explained to the horse, as if he could understand her words. "Daddy said he was taking me to a safe place, but he left me here and drove away." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears began to roll down her feverish cheeks. Storm remained motionless, allowing her to lean on him as he processed the confession. His ears moved constantly, alert to any sound that might indicate danger, but his eyes remained focused on the girl. There was a mutual understanding between them that transcended the barriers of species. The afternoon was advancing, and the forest shadows grew longer and more menacing. Storm knew that this was not a safe place for a sick child to spend the night. Nocturnal predators would soon begin to circulate, and the temperature would drop significantly after sunset. With slow, deliberate movements, the horse lowered himself, bending his front legs to make it easier for Sophia to climb onto his back. The gesture was clear. He was offering her a ride to a safe place. Sophia looked at him with surprise and gratitude. Throughout her short life, no one had ever shown such spontaneous care for her well-being. Not even her biological mother, consumed by illness, had been able to offer the kind of unconditional protection that this animal was providing. "You want to take me away from here?" she asked, gently stroking Storm's neck. "To a place where I can be safe." The horse whinnied softly, a gentle sound that almost sounded like a confirmation. Sophia gathered her remaining strength and managed to climb onto Storm's broad, stable back. The animal's coat was warm against her feverish skin, and she clung to his mane like an anchor amidst the storm of emotions that overwhelmed her. Storm carefully stood up, making sure Sophia was secure before beginning to walk. His steps were deliberately slow and gentle, like those of a mother carrying a baby. Despite the pain in his injured leg, he showed no sign of discomfort that might alarm the child. As they moved away from the sinister clearing, Sophia allowed herself to relax for the first time since she had been abandoned. Storm's rhythmic movement was hypnotic, and the warmth of his body helped combat the fever's chills. She closed her eyes and imagined herself in a good dream, where white horses saved lost children and carried them to loving homes. "What's your name?" she murmured, against his silky mane. "You must have a beautiful name, because you're the bravest horse in the world." Storm continued walking along the narrow trail he knew by heart. Every tree, every bend in the path was familiar to him. He was taking Sophia home, to the farm where Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe had lived for 40 years, a place where lost children always found shelter and care. The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky with orange hues that filtered through the forest leaves. Sophia murmured something unintelligible, her voice choked by exhaustion and fever. Storm slightly increased his pace, concerned about his small passenger's condition. At the farm, Grandma Rose was preparing dinner when she noticed Storm hadn't returned at his usual time. He was an animal of regular habits, always coming home before dusk. His absence began to worry her. "Joe," she called to her husband, who was mending a nearby fence. "Storm hasn't come back yet. Do you think something might have happened?" Grandpa Joe looked up from his work and glanced towards the forest. "That horse knows every inch of these trails, Rose. He must be on his way back now." But both knew something was different. Storm was never late without reason, and a strange premonition began to settle in their worried hearts. The first sign that they were approaching civilization was the smell of wood smoke mingled with the aroma of homemade food. Sophia, half asleep on Storm's back, lifted her head when she noticed the dense forest giving way to a more open landscape with cultivated fields and wooden fences. Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe's farm appeared like an oasis of tranquility. It was a modest property with a white-painted wooden house, a well-kept stable, and a garden where wildflowers and vegetables grew. Chickens pecked freely in the yard, and 2 goats grazed in a small pen. Everything exuded simplicity and welcoming warmth. Grandma Rose was the first to spot Storm approaching along the dirt path. She was hanging clothes on the line when she saw the familiar silhouette of the white horse emerging from the twilight. But something was wrong. He was limping visibly, and there was a small form on his back. "Joe!" she cried, dropping the clothes she held. "Come quick! Storm's back, but something's wrong!" Grandpa Joe ran out of the workshop where he was finishing a tool repair. At 72, he still maintained the agility of someone who had worked in the fields his entire life. When he saw Storm approaching with his precious cargo, his heart pounded. "Oh my goodness," Grandma Rose murmured, covering her mouth with her hands. "It's a child." Storm stopped in the middle of the yard, clearly exhausted. His nostrils were flared, and sweat ran down his body, but even so, he carefully lowered himself to make it easier for Sophia to dismount from his back. The girl was semi-conscious, mumbling disconnected words amidst the fever. "Careful, Rose," Grandpa Joe said as he approached slowly. "We don't know where she came from." Grandma Rose, however, had already activated all her maternal instincts. At 68 years old and 45 years of marriage, she and Joe had never been able to have children of their own. This absence had created in them a special love for all children who crossed their path. Neighbors, grandchildren, children of farm workers, little ones who sometimes got lost and ended up knocking on their door. "Look at her, Joe," Rose whispered, kneeling beside Sophia. "She's burning up with fever, and look at Storm's injuries. He fought for this girl." The horse's leg was clearly wounded, with 3 deep gashes that were still bleeding. But Storm remained calm, as if he understood that he had fulfilled his mission by bringing Sophia to a safe place. His intelligent eyes seemed to communicate the urgency of the situation. Sophia opened her eyes when she felt gentle hands touching her forehead. The face she saw was that of an elderly woman, with grey hair pulled back in a bun and blue eyes filled with maternal concern. It was a kind face, marked by the years but radiating human warmth. "Where am I?" Sophia asked in a weak voice. "You're safe, my dear," Grandma Rose replied softly. "I'm Rose, and this is my husband, Joe. Storm brought you to our home." "Storm?" Sophia looked at the white horse, who was watching her intently. "Is that his name?" Grandpa Joe smiled despite his worry. "It is, and from what I see, he decided you needed care. Storm has a special instinct for these things." Grandma Rose placed her hand on Sophia's forehead and frowned. "This fever is very high. We need to get her inside immediately and give her something to bring her temperature down." "And what do we do about the situation?" Grandpa Joe asked in a low voice. "A child who shows up like this, injured and feverish, someone might be looking for her." The question hung in the air, heavy with responsibility. Both knew that finding a lost child involved protocols, authorities, difficult questions, but looking at Sophia, so small, so fragile, clearly traumatized, their bureaucratic concerns seemed secondary. First, we take care of the fever, Grandma Rose decided firmly. Then we'll think about the rest. They carried Sophia into the house, which was simple but extremely clean and welcoming. The walls were decorated with family photographs, handmade embroideries, and small objects that told the story of a shared life. The guest bedroom, normally reserved for rare visitors, was quickly prepared to receive the girl. Grandma Rose soaked cloths in cold water for compresses, while Grandpa Joe prepared an herbal tea he'd learned from his grandmother. Sophia was gently bathed and dressed in one of Rose's cotton nightgowns, which was enormous on her small body. "Where are your parents, dear?" Rose asked gently as she placed a cold compress on Sophia's forehead. The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy left me in the forest. He drove away and didn't come back. He said he was taking me to a safe place. But he lied." The couple exchanged a meaningful glance. The story didn't make sense. What kind of father would abandon a sick child in a dangerous forest? But Sophia's tears were too real to be questioned. "And your mother?" Grandpa Joe gently pressed. "Mommy's sick," Sophia murmured, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. "She told me Daddy would take care of me, but he doesn't want to. Nobody wants me." The words cut Grandma Rose's heart like a knife. She knelt beside the bed and held Sophia's small hand in her own, calloused from decades of farm work. "That's not true, my dear," she said in a firm but loving voice. "Storm wanted you enough to fight for you, and we want to take care of you until all this is cleared up." Outside, Grandpa Joe was treating Storm's injuries. The horse allowed himself to be examined docilely, as if he understood he needed to heal to continue protecting Sophia. The cuts were deep but clean, and with proper care, they would heal well. "You did the right thing, old friend," Joe murmured as he cleaned the wounds, "but now we have a problem on our hands." During the first night, Sophia alternated between moments of feverish delirium and periods of restless sleep. Grandma Rose didn't leave her side for a moment, changing compresses, offering small sips of sweetened water, and whispering words of comfort whenever the girl woke up scared. "Don't leave me, please," Sophia begged in her moments of consciousness, clinging to Rose's hand with surprising strength for someone so small and frail. "I'm not going anywhere, my dear," Rose always replied, stroking the girl's sweaty hair. "I'm here. You're safe." Grandpa Joe spent the night alternating between checking on Sophia's condition and caring for Storm. The horse, even injured, refused to move far from the house. He grazed near the window of the room where Sophia rested, like a silent guardian watching over his protégé. The next morning, the fever had slightly subsided, but Sophia was still very weak. Grandma Rose prepared a nutritious broth with free-range chicken and fresh vegetables from the garden, firmly believing in the healing power of food made with love. "You need to eat something to regain your strength," Rose said, sitting on the edge of the bed with a steaming bowl. Sophia tried to sit up but was still dizzy. "My stomach hurts," she murmured. "It's normal when you haven't eaten properly for a long time. Let's try just a little bit at a time." Patiently, Grandma Rose gave Sophia small spoonfuls of the warm broth. With each swallow, she could see a little color returning to the girl's pale cheeks. It was a slow but promising process. Grandpa Joe watched from the doorway, concerned not only about Sophia's health, but also about the implications of her presence. On the farm, they lived a simple, honest life, but they didn't have the resources for specialized medical care if the situation worsened. "Rose," he called softly, gesturing for her to talk in the hallway. "What do we do if she doesn't get better?" He whispered, "We need to think about taking her to a doctor, and that means involving the authorities." Grandma Rose looked back at Sophia, who had fallen asleep again. Let's give it one more day. If the fever doesn't break, we'll have no choice. In the city, 2 hours away from the farm, Edward Vance was in his office trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. He had told Eleanor and a few close employees that Sophia got lost during an outing in the forest and that he was organizing search parties. It was an elaborate lie he had practiced all night. Edward was a man accustomed to manipulating situations for his benefit, and this skill now served to cover up his crime. "Mr. Vance," his secretary said, "do you want me to contact the sheriff's department to officially report the disappearance?" Edward hesitated. Involving the police would make everything more real, more official, but it would also establish his version of events in the official records. "Yes," he decided. "Tell them my daughter got lost during a hike in the Blackwood National Forest yesterday afternoon." Meanwhile, at the farm, Sophia had woken up and was looking out the window. Storm was grazing in the nearby field, and even from a distance, she could see that he was limping slightly. "He got hurt because of me," she told Grandma Rose, who had returned to check on her. "Storm did what his heart told him to," Rose replied. "Animals like him know when someone needs help." "Why did he save me? He didn't even know me." Grandma Rose sat beside Sophia, thinking how best to explain. "Sometimes, my dear, kindness doesn't need an explanation. Some creatures are born with hearts too big to ignore the suffering of others." Sophia reflected on these words. In her short life, she had mostly known people who only thought of themselves. First her mother, consumed by her own illness to adequately care for her. Then Edward, who saw her only as a problem to be solved. "You two also have big hearts," Sophia said softly. Rose felt her eyes well up with tears. "We just do what's right, dear." During the afternoon, Grandpa Joe made a decision that had weighed on his conscience for hours. He drove his old pickup truck to the nearest town to buy children's fever medicine and other supplies that might help Sophia. At the pharmacy, while explaining the symptoms to the pharmacist, he overheard a conversation between two women in the line next to him. "Did you hear about that little girl who got lost in the forest?" one of them said. "Her father is Edward Vance, that rich developer. They say he's offering a reward for whoever finds his daughter." "How terrible," the other replied. "A lost child in that forest full of wild animals? She probably didn't make it." Grandpa Joe felt a chill. Edward Vance, he knew that name. He was one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the region, known for his arrogance and ruthlessness in business. If Sophia was really his daughter, why had she been found alone and abandoned in the forest? Returning home, Joe recounted what he had heard to Rose. Both were disturbed by the implications. "Do you think she ran away from home?" Rose asked. "Or something worse," Joe replied grimly. "A 6-year-old child doesn't go into a dangerous forest alone. Someone took her there." They agreed not to confront Sophia with this information yet. The girl was slowly recovering, and they didn't want to traumatize her further with difficult questions. That night, Sophia woke from a nightmare, screaming. Grandma Rose rushed to the room and found her trembling violently. "He came back!" Sophia cried. "The bad man came back to take me." "What man, dear?" Rose asked gently, hugging Sophia to calm her. "Daddy. He has cold eyes and doesn't like me. He left me with the big beast to hurt me." Sophia's words confirmed Rose and Joe's worst fears. The child hadn't gotten lost. She had been purposely abandoned by her own father. A week had passed since Sophia arrived at the farm. Her fever had finally completely subsided, and she was beginning to show signs of recovery. Grandma Rose had managed to get her to eat full meals, and the girl's cheeks already showed a little more color. But the emotional scars remained visible. Sophia woke up screaming almost every night, and she hid whenever she heard the sound of approaching cars. In the city, Monica Torres was experiencing her worst days since the diagnosis. The rare disease, that corroded her body had accelerated its progression, leaving her extremely debilitated. But what tormented her more than physical pain was the growing anxiety about Sophia. Since handing her daughter over to Edward, she had received no news. Initially, she had respected his request to allow Sophia time to adapt to her new life. But as the silent days passed, a terrible uneasiness began to consume her maternal heart. Monica had few resources, but she used her last savings to buy a simple cell phone. With trembling hands, she dialed Edward's office number for the 10th time that week. "Vance Developments, good morning," the secretary answered in a professional voice. "I need to speak with Edward Vance. It's about his daughter," Monica said, trying to control the anxiety in her voice. "Mr. Vance is in an important meeting and cannot be disturbed. Can I take a message?" "Tell him it's Monica Torres. It's urgent." There was a prolonged pause. "One moment, please." Edward was indeed in a meeting with investors when his secretary interrupted him. Hearing Monica's name, he felt a pang of panic. He excused himself from the attendees and took the call in his private office. "Monica," he said, forcing a worried tone. "Good thing you called. I was just thinking of getting in touch." "Edward, how is Sophia? I haven't heard anything for a week. I know I asked for time, but I'm really worried." Edward had rehearsed this conversation in his mind many times. "Monica, I have terrible news. Sophia, she got lost during an outing we took in the forest last weekend." The silence that followed was deafening. Monica felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "What do you mean, lost?" Her voice was just a whisper. "We were hiking on the main trail in the Blackwood National Forest. It was supposed to be a simple walk for me to get to know her better. But she ran after a butterfly and, when I realized it, she had disappeared. The sheriff's department is searching. I've organized search teams. I've offered a reward. I'm doing everything I can." Tears began to roll down Monica's pale face. "You let a 6-year-old child get lost in a forest full of wild animals." "It was a terrible accident, Monica. I blame myself every day. But you have to believe that I'm moving heaven and earth to find her." Something in Edward's voice didn't sound right to Monica. She had known him well years ago, before success and ambition transformed him into the cold man he had become. She detected a false note in his words, an artificiality she couldn't ignore. "I want to see the sheriff's reports," she said with a firmness that surprised her. "Monica, you're sick. You shouldn't stress yourself with these details. Let me handle everything." "Edward, that's my daughter. I want to be involved in the search." Of course. I'll send everything by email, but please try to rest. Stress won't help anyone." After hanging up the phone, Monica sat on her makeshift hospital bed at home, processing the conversation. There was something deeply wrong with the whole situation. Edward had always been self-centered, but he wasn't. Reckless. How could he have allowed a child to get lost in territory known to be dangerous? With her last ounce of strength, Monica put on a coat and headed to town. Every step was a struggle against the weakness that consumed her body, but her love for Sophia propelled her. She needed to see the sheriff's reports personally, needed to speak with the people involved in the search. At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Harding received her with compassion. He was a middle-aged man, a father of 3, who understood a mother's despair. "Ms. Torres, I'm very sorry about the situation. We're doing everything possible to find your daughter. I want to see all the details. Where exactly did she get lost? What trail were you on?" The sheriff hesitated. "Actually, there are some inconsistencies in Mr. Vance's account that we're trying to clarify." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Well, he said they were on the main trail of the National Forest, but we couldn't find any evidence that they were actually there. No small footprints, no traces, and there's another problem." Monica felt her heart race. "What problem?" Mr. Vance took almost 24 hours to report the disappearance. He said he tried to look for her alone first, but that's a very long time for a lost child. 24 hours. Monica felt a wave of nausea. A 6-year-old child lost in a dangerous forest, and he waited a whole day to ask for help? We also found it strange. That's why we're investigating more deeply. Monica left the sheriff's office with a terrible certainty forming in her mind. Edward was lying, but why? And more importantly, where was Sophia? With her last savings, she hired Robert "Bobby" Nash, a private investigator recommended by a friend. Bobby was a former police officer who specialized in missing persons cases. "I want you to investigate everything about my daughter's disappearance," she said, handing him all the information she had. "Something is very wrong with her." Father's version of events. Bobby examined the documents and asked some questions about Edward's character. The more he heard, the more his professional experience warned him of signs that there was much more to this story than met the eye. "Ms. Torres, I'll be direct. In my experience, when a father takes so long to report a child's disappearance, especially in dangerous circumstances, there's usually something he doesn't want discovered." Bobby's words confirmed Monica's worst fears. That night, as the illness attacked her debilitated body, she clung to the hope that Sophia was still alive, somewhere waiting to be found. What she didn't know was that just 2 hours away, her daughter was safe in the loving arms of Grandma Rose, recovering not only from her illness, but also from the trauma of having been abandoned by the one who should have protected her above all else. Robert "Bobby" Nash began his investigation meticulously. With 20 years of police experience, he had developed a keen instinct for detecting when something didn't add up in the versions presented by those involved. Sophia Vance's case presented several points that aroused his professional distrust. His first stop was the Blackwood National Forest, where Sophia had supposedly gotten lost. Bobby knew that region well. He had participated in several search and rescue operations over the years. The main trail mentioned by Edward was well marked and frequented by tourists, with signs every 500 yards. "For a child to get lost here," Bobby muttered to himself as he walked the trail, "she would have to deliberately go off the marked path." He spent hours examining the area, looking for any evidence that a child had actually been there. He found nothing. No small footprints, no piece of clothing, no sign that Sophia had ever set foot in that location. His next investigation led him to Edward's company employees. Through old contacts in law enforcement, Bobby gained access to information that a private investigator would not normally obtain easily. "What caught my attention," he explained to Monica during a meeting at her home, "was your ex-boyfriend's behavior in the week leading up to the supposed disappearance." Monica, visibly weaker than the previous week, propped herself up on pillows to hear him better. "What kind of behavior?" Edward made several strange calls. One of them was to a known underworld informant who sells information about specific locations in the forest. "What kind of locations?" Bobby hesitated, not wanting to alarm an already desperate mother further. "Places where wild animals usually hunt, specifically big cat territories." Monica's blood ran cold. "Are you suggesting—" I'm just reporting facts, Ms. Torres. I also discovered that Edward visited a sporting goods store and asked about detailed maps of the most dangerous part of the forest, areas that are definitely not suitable for outings with children." While Bobby conducted his investigation at the farm, Sophia was experiencing her first moments of true peace in a long time. Grandma Rose had proven to be a natural caregiver, treating the girl with a combination of maternal affection and practical wisdom. "Storm wants to see you," Rose told Sophia during breakfast. "He gets restless whenever you don't appear at the window." Sophia smiled, her first genuine smile since her arrival. Can I visit him? Of course, dear. But first, let's finish. This smoothie. The smoothie was made with fresh farm fruits, goat's milk, and honey from the beehives Grandpa Joe kept. Sophia had gained weight since her arrival, and her pale skin was beginning to show healthy signs of controlled sun exposure. Outside, Storm whinnied softly whenever he saw Sophia approaching. The injuries on his leg had healed well, leaving only 3 small scars that would serve as an eternal reminder of his courage. The horse lowered his head so Sophia could pet him, and she had developed the habit of talking to him about her fears and hopes. "Do you think anyone is looking for me?" she asked the horse, as if he could answer. "Sometimes I think maybe Mommy is worried." Grandpa Joe observed these interactions from a distance, increasingly convinced that Sophia had gone through something traumatic that went far beyond getting lost in the forest. The girl showed genuine fear whenever she mentioned her father, but spoke fondly of her sick mother. "Rose," he said to his wife after dinner, "we need to make a decision about what to do with the girl." "What do you mean?" "It's been over a week. She's clearly physically better, but she still has nightmares every night. And if she really is that rich developer's daughter..." "Joe, you saw the fear in her eyes when she talks about her father. Whatever the situation, she doesn't want to go back to him. But we can't just keep a child here forever. Eventually, someone will ask difficult questions." This conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car approaching along the dirt road. Both tensed. Visitors were rare at the farm, especially at night. Through the window, they saw an official county vehicle stopping in the yard. A middle-aged man got out of the vehicle and headed to the front door. "Good evening," he said, when Grandpa Joe opened the door. "I'm Carl Hayes, a social worker from the county office. We received a report that you might be sheltering a child." Rose's heart pounded. "Who said that?" "Anonymous information, but I'm required to investigate. May I come in?" Grandpa Joe reluctantly allowed the social worker inside. Sophia, who was playing in the living room, looked at the stranger with eyes wide with fear. "Is this the girl?" Carl Hayes asked, approaching Sophia. "Don't get close to her," Rose said firmly, placing herself protectively between the man and Sophia. "She's recovering from trauma. Ma'am, if this child is Sophia Vance, as I suspect, then she needs to be returned to her family immediately. There's an intensive search happening." "She told us she was purposefully abandoned," Grandpa Joe said, no longer able to keep the truth to himself. "Why would a child invent a story like that?" Carl Hayes seemed surprised. "Abandoned? That's a very serious accusation, but regardless of the circumstances, I can't leave her in unauthorized custody of civilians." Sophia began to cry silently, clinging to Grandma Rose's dress. "Please don't make me go back to the bad man," she whispered. The girl's plea created a moment of palpable tension in the room. Carl Hayes looked at Sophia, then at the elderly couple who clearly cared deeply for her. "I'll need to make some calls," he finally said, "but for today, the girl can stay here. I'll return tomorrow with proper protocol." After his departure, Rose held Sophia in her arms as the girl trembled with fear. "I won't let anyone hurt you," Rose promised. "We'll find a way to protect you." But everyone knew that time was running out and that forces much larger than them were moving to reclaim Sophia. The next morning, Edward Vance was in his office when he received the call he had been waiting for days. On the other end of the line, a voice simply said, "We found the girl." Edward felt a mixture of relief and panic. His plan had failed. Sophia was alive. Now he needed to act quickly to control the situation before his version of events was questioned. "Where is she?" he asked, already formulating a new strategy. "With a farming couple on the outskirts of the forest. Apparently, they found her over a week ago and were taking care of her." Edward hung up the phone and immediately called his private. Attorney, Marcus, I need you to prepare an emergency action. My daughter has been found, but she's being illegally kept by strangers who refuse to return her. That's great, Edward. Where was she? The details don't matter right now. What matters is that these people might be trying to blackmail me or something worse. I want a court order to retrieve my daughter immediately. Using his influence and financial resources, Edward managed to expedite the legal process. In a few hours, he held a court order authorizing Sophia's immediate removal from the farm. Meanwhile, Robert "Bobby" Nash continued his meticulous investigation. That same day, he discovered something that would completely change the course of the case. Talking to employees at a gas station near the forest, he obtained access to security footage from the week of the disappearance. "Can I see the footage from the 15th? Bobby asked the manager. "Sure, but what do you need it for?" "Private. Investigation. I'm looking for evidence of a specific car that passed through here. The footage clearly showed Edward Vance's black Mercedes arriving at the gas station around 2 in the afternoon, filling up and buying water. What caught Robert's eye was Edward's nervous behavior and the fact that there was a child in the back seat who appeared to be asleep or unconscious. "Could this recording serve as evidence?" Robert asked. "Absolutely. We keep everything archived. For 40 days. Robert copied the footage and continued his investigation. His next discovery was even more incriminating. Talking to a local veterinarian, he learned about an injured horse that had been treated the week of the disappearance. The wounds were clearly from a large feline attack, the vet explained. 3 deep gashes on the front leg. The horse belongs to the couple who live on the farm near the forest. "And did they mention anything about how the horse got injured?" "They said he had defended a child from a tiger. At the time, I thought they were exaggerating, but the injuries were consistent with the story." Robert felt the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. Sophia hadn't gotten lost. She had been abandoned in predator territory, and Storm had saved her, getting hurt in the process. At the farm, the tension was palpable. Carl Hayes had returned with a larger team, including 2 sheriff's deputies and an additional social worker. They were also accompanied by a well-dressed man who identified himself as Edward Vance's attorney. "We have a court order," announced Marcus, the attorney, presenting the official documents. "Sophia Vance must be returned to her father immediately." Grandma Rose hugged Sophia tightly, feeling the girl tremble violently. "She's terrified," Rose said. "Look at her. This isn't the reaction of a child happy to see her father." "A lost child's emotions can be complex," Marcus replied coldly. "The important thing is that she be reunited with her legal family." Grandpa Joe tried one last gambit. "What if we let her speak? Let Sophia tell her own version of what happened." "A 6-year-old child who has experienced trauma is not a reliable witness," the attorney retorted. "Besides, you may have influenced her memories during all this time you've kept her here illegally." Sophia finally found the courage to speak. "I don't want to go. Daddy left me with the big beast to hurt me. Please don't make me go back." Her words caused an awkward moment of silence. Carl Hayes knelt down to Sophia's level. "Sophia, are you sure about what you're saying? Sometimes, when we're scared, our memory can play tricks on us." "I'm not lying," Sophia cried, running to hide behind Storm, who had approached the house, sensing the commotion. The horse positioned himself protectively between Sophia and the officials, clearly demonstrating his distrust of the strangers. His ears were laid back, and he snorted nervously. "Even the horse knows something's wrong," Grandma Rose murmured, but the words of a child and the behavior of an animal held no legal weight against a court order. Marcus had managed to portray the elderly couple as potential kidnappers who had brainwashed Sophia. "I'm very sorry," Carl Hayes said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "But I must comply with the court order. Sophia must accompany the officers." It was at this critical moment that a car raising dust on the dirt road announced the unexpected arrival of Robert Nash. The private investigator had driven at high speed after discovering the incriminating evidence. "Wait!" he shouted, getting out of the car with a folder full of documents. "I have evidence that could change everything." Marcus tried to intervene. "This man has no legal authority here. I am a licensed private investigator, hired by the child's biological mother," Robert replied, showing his credentials. "And I have proof that Edward Vance lied about the circumstances of Sophia's disappearance." He showed the gas station footage, the veterinary report on Storm's injuries, and other documents he had collected. "This evidence strongly suggests that Sophia was purposely abandoned in territory known to harbor dangerous predators," Robert explained. "The horse saved her from a tiger attack and brought her to this farm, where she has received proper care." Carl Hayes examined the documents with growing interest. "These are very serious accusations." "These are documented facts," Robert insisted. "And there's more. Edward Vance made several suspicious calls before the disappearance, including contacts with informants about wild animal locations." Marcus tried to discredit the evidence. "Speculation and coincidence do not invalidate a valid court order," but Carl Hayes was clearly disturbed by the revelations. "Given the serious nature of these allegations, I believe it would be prudent to temporarily suspend the execution of the order until a proper investigation can be conducted." The room erupted into heated arguments between lawyers and officers, while Sophia remained hidden behind Storm, waiting for the adults to decide her fate. Carl Hayes' decision to temporarily suspend the court order created a tense standoff at the farm. Marcus, Edward's attorney, made several urgent calls to try to reverse the situation, while Robert organized his evidence to present to the competent authorities. "I want to speak with my client," Robert said, referring to Monica. "She has the right to be present when her daughter's future is discussed." 2 hours later, Monica arrived at the farm in a taxi, visibly debilitated by her illness, but determined to fight for Sophia. When she saw her daughter playing in the yard with Storm, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Sophia!" she called, in a weak voice. The girl turned and ran towards her mother, completely ignoring all the adults present. "Mommy! You came for me!" The reunion between mother and daughter was moving to witness. Monica hugged Sophia with all the strength she had left, whispering words of love and apologies. "I'm so sorry, my dear. I'm so sorry I let this happen." Sophia, through tears, told her mother everything that had happened since she had been given to Edward. She spoke about the abandonment in the forest, the tiger attack, Storm's courage, and the loving care of Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe. Monica listened to every word with growing horror and fury. When Sophia finished her account, she turned to Carl Hayes with renewed determination. "I want to file formal charges against Edward Vance for child abandonment, child endangerment, and attempted murder," she declared. Marcus tried to intervene. "These are unfounded accusations based on the testimony of a traumatized child." "They are not unfounded when there is physical evidence that corroborates every detail," Robert retorted, showing the documents he had collected again. At that moment, Sheriff Harding arrived at the farm, alerted by Carl Hayes about the seriousness of the situation. As an experienced father and veteran officer, he knew how to recognize when a child was telling the truth about trauma. "Sophia," he said gently, kneeling down to the girl's level, "can you tell me what happened in your own words?" Sophia looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. With a clear voice, despite her fear, she recounted the events again. How Edward had taken her to the forest, how he had abandoned her alone, the tiger attack, and how Storm had saved her. "Daddy had cold eyes," she said, "and he talked to bad people before taking me to the place with big animals." The sheriff asked a few more specific questions that only someone who had truly experienced the events could answer. The consistency and details of Sophia's account were too convincing to be an invention. "I'm going to need to officially interrogate Edward Vance," the sheriff declared, "and I want a pediatrician to examine Sophia to document any evidence of trauma or neglect." Marcus made a last attempt. "My client is willing to settle this amicably, perhaps financial compensation for the mother and—" "This isn't about money!" Monica exploded, her voice gaining strength despite her physical weakness. "This is about a man who tried to murder an innocent child." While the legal aspects were being discussed, Grandma Rose approached Monica. "Mom, your daughter is a special girl. During these weeks, she brought joy to our home. If you need help with medical care or anything—" "Thank you," Monica replied, touched by the woman's genuine kindness. "You saved my daughter in a way that goes far beyond the physical. You gave her love when she needed it most." Dr. Frank Allen, the town pediatrician, arrived to examine Sophia. He examined her carefully, documenting signs of recent malnutrition, post-traumatic stress, and other indicators consistent with abandonment and trauma. "This child has been through a terrible experience," he declared after the examination. "The physical and psychological signs are clear. She needs specialized follow-up to recover completely." Meanwhile, in the city, Edward was in his office, trying to control a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his hands. His phone rang constantly with calls from journalists who had discovered the story. "Mr. Vance," his secretary said nervously, "the police are here. They want to speak with you." Edward knew it was time to face the consequences of his actions. For weeks, he had believed that his wealth and influence would protect him. But concrete evidence and Sophia's courageous testimony were carefully destroying his facade of respectability. Back at the farm, an important decision was being made. Carl Hayes, based on all the evidence presented and Sophia's clear distress, at the prospect of returning to Edward, decided to grant temporary custody to Monica. Given the serious nature of the allegations and the evident well-being of the child under alternative care, I authorize Sophia to remain with her biological mother while investigations proceed, he officially declared. Sophia hugged Monica tightly, finally feeling safe, but there was a worry in her young heart. "Mommy, what if you get too sick to take care of me?" Monica looked at Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe, who had become part of Sophia's family during those crucial weeks. "Then you'll have other adults who care about you," she said, smiling through tears. "People who proved they would do anything to protect you." Storm approached the group, as if he understood he was being discussed. Sophia hugged him affectionately. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered in the horse's ear. "You're my hero forever." The horse whinnied softly, as if saying, "You're welcome, little one." His mission was complete. He had saved an innocent life and delivered her to people who truly cared about her well-being. But everyone knew that the battle was not yet over. Edward had not yet been officially confronted with the evidence, and his influence could create additional complications. The true proof that justice would prevail was still to come. The sheriff's office was unusually busy that Thursday morning. Journalists crowded outside, while Edward Vance arrived accompanied by his attorneys for the official interrogation. His usual impeccable appearance was slightly shaken. His suit was still expensive, but there was a visible tension in his movements. Sheriff Harding had carefully prepared the interrogation. On the table in front of him were all the evidence, collected by Robert Nash: the gas station recordings, phone records, veterinary reports, and photographs of Storm's injuries. "Mr. Vance," the sheriff began, "I'd like you to tell me in detail what happened on the 15th of this month." Edward maintained his rehearsed version. "I took my daughter for a walk in the forest to get to know each other better. She ran after a butterfly and got lost. I searched for hours before asking for official help." "Interesting," the sheriff said, showing the first piece of evidence. Because we have recordings here that show you at a gas station near the forest with a child seemingly unconscious in the back seat. Edward looked at the screen, his confidence beginning to waver. She was asleep. She was sick, with a fever. And yet you decided to take her for a walk in a dangerous forest? I thought the fresh air would help. The sheriff methodically continued presenting the evidence. The phone records showing calls to informants about predator territories. The inquiries about maps of dangerous areas. The inexplicable delay in reporting the disappearance. Mr. Vance, why would a concerned father wait 24 hours to ask for official help to find a 6-year-old child lost in a forest full of predators? Marcus, the attorney, tried to intervene. My client was in a state of shock. Let him answer, the sheriff said firmly. Edward was visibly starting to sweat. I thought I could find her myself. I didn't want to unnecessarily alarm the authorities. At that moment, the room door opened and Monica entered, accompanied by Robert Nash and a social worker. Edward visibly paled upon seeing his ex-girlfriend. Monica shouldn't be here, Marcus protested. She has the right to be present as the victim's mother, the sheriff replied. And besides, she can clarify some points about the accused's character. Monica sat across from Edward, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of pain and determination. Despite the illness consuming her, she had found the strength to fight for Sophia. Edward, she said in a firm voice, why did you do this to an innocent child? I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, but his voice didn't carry the same conviction as before. Robert Nash then presented his most devastating evidence. We managed to trace Mr. Vance's calls. One of them was to a known information broker who specializes in locating hunting territories for large felines, specifically tiger territories. The silence in the room was deafening. Edward stared fixedly at the table, his face completely losing its color. Furthermore, Robert continued, we have the testimony of the veterinarian who treated the horse that saved Sophia. The injuries were consistent with a tiger attack, and the animal clearly defended a child. Monica leaned forward. Edward, did you really expect a tiger to kill our daughter so she wouldn't disrupt your perfect life? This has nothing to do with a perfect life, Edward finally exploded, his mask of composure crumbling. You showed up out of nowhere with a child I didn't even know existed. Eleanor made it clear she wouldn't raise that woman's child. My business was at stake, my reputation. So you admit you purposely abandoned the child? The sheriff asked. Edward realized too late that he had confessed. Marcus tried to do damage control. My client is clearly distraught. He's distraught because he was discovered, Monica said with disgust. You're a monster, Edward. How could you look into an innocent child's eyes and condemn her to death? Edward stood up abruptly. You don't understand the pressure I was under. It was her or everything I'd worked for my whole life. So you chose your business over your own daughter's life, the sheriff concluded. Mr. Vance, you're under arrest for child abandonment, child endangerment, and attempted murder. As the handcuffs were placed on his wrists, Edward made one last desperate attempt. Monica, we can resolve this. I have money. I can pay for the best treatment for your illness. I want nothing from you, she replied firmly, except that you stay away from Sophia forever. As Edward was led from the sheriff's office, facing a crowd of journalists and photographers, his fall from respected businessman to confessed criminal was being broadcast in real time. At the farm, Sophia was playing in the yard with Storm when Grandma Rose received Monica's call with the news. Sophia, Rose called gently, your mommy called. The bad man won't bother you anymore. You're safe now. Sophia ran to hug Rose, then went to Storm and gently kissed his muzzle. Thank you for protecting me, she whispered. Now I can stay with people who truly love me. Dissy, the horse whinnied softly, as if he understood that his mission of protection had been successful. The girl he had saved from the clutches of a predator was now also protected from human predators. For the first time since she arrived at the farm, Sophia fell asleep that night without nightmares. She knew she was truly safe, surrounded by people who risked everything to protect her. Justice had finally prevailed, but the true victory was in the courage of a small girl who found the strength to tell the truth, and in the unconditional love of people who proved that family is defined not only by blood, but by care and protection. Edward. Vance's arrest caused shockwaves through the city's elite. Local and national newspapers intensively covered the case of the child who was saved by a horse after being abandoned by her own father. The story touched the hearts of thousands of people who sent letters of support to Sophia and offered help to her family. 3 days after Edward's arrest, Monica was at home organizing legal papers when she received an unexpected visit. Eleanor, Edward's wife, stood at her door, visibly embarrassed and nervous. "Monica, can I talk to you?" Eleanor asked, her hands trembling slightly. Monica hesitated, but her compassionate nature made her allow entry to the woman who, indirectly, had contributed to Sophia's suffering. "I came to apologize," Eleanor said as soon as she sat down. "I didn't know. I never imagined Edward would be capable of something so terrible." "But you made it clear you wouldn't accept Sophia in your home," Monica replied calmly. Eleanor lowered her eyes, ashamed. "It's true, I was jealous and my pride was hurt. But I never wanted an innocent child to suffer because of it. When I found out what Edward did," her voice broke. "Eleanor, you weren't the one who abandoned Sophia in the forest. That responsibility is entirely Edward's. But if I had been different, if I had accepted her into our home. Edward is a man who always finds excuses for his cruel actions," Monica said. "If it wasn't you, it would be something else." Eleanor took a thick envelope from her purse. "I'm divorcing Edward, and I want you to know that I'm going to use my portion of the assets to create a fund for Sophia's medical treatment and your own treatment." Monica was surprised by the gesture. "Eleanor, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. It's the only way I can sleep peacefully, knowing that I contributed, even indirectly, to a child's suffering." Meanwhile, at the farm, Sophia was undergoing a remarkable transformation. With the fear of being forced to return to Edward finally dissipated, she began to show the joyful and curious personality natural for a 6-year-old. "Grandma Rose," she said while helping to feed the chickens, "can I learn to take care of Storm? I want to repay all his kindness." "Of course, dear. Storm would love to have you as his special helper." Grandpa Joe had become a father figure to Sophia, teaching her about farm life and patiently listening to her stories and worries. The girl had found in that couple the stability and unconditional love that had always been missing from her life. "Grandpa Joe," Sophia asked one afternoon, "why are some people bad and others good?" It was a profound question, coming from a child who had experienced both extremes of human nature. Joe thought carefully before answering. "You know, Sophia, I think people choose who they want to be every day. Some choose fear and selfishness. Others choose love and courage. You and Storm chose to be courageous when it mattered most. And you chose to love me even without knowing me," Sophia said, hugging the elderly man. Dr. Frank Allen had been regularly monitoring Sophia's progress. During one consultation, he had an important conversation with Monica about the future. "Monica, I need to be honest about your condition," he said gently. "The treatment is helping, but your illness is still very serious. We need to discuss plans for Sophia's care if I don't survive," Monica finished calmly. "I've already thought about it, doctor. Rose and Joe have offered to take care of her, and legally I'm already arranging the adoption. They are special people. Sophia will have a family that truly loves her. That night, Monica had a difficult but necessary conversation with Sophia. She explained in an age-appropriate manner about her illness and the possibility that Rose and Joe would become her permanent family. "Will Mommy be okay?" Sophia asked, her big eyes full of concern. "I'm going to fight hard to stay with you as long as possible," Monica promised. "But if something happens, you already have people who love you and will take care of you forever. And Storm too. Storm too, my dear." The most impactful news arrived a week later. Robert Nash discovered that Edward had embezzled funds from the company to finance his luxurious lifestyle. The investigation revealed a network of corruption that went far beyond Sophia's abandonment. "He didn't just lose his freedom," Robert explained to Monica. "He lost his entire fortune too. Ironically, the very resources he used to try and get rid of Sophia will now be used to care for her." Edward, facing multiple criminal charges, had tried to make a plea deal to reduce his sentence. Part of that deal included relinquishing all in parental rights over Sophia and allocating part of his remaining assets for her medical care and education. "It's strange," Monica commented to Robert, "how justice sometimes works in unexpected ways." At the farm, Sophia was having her best day since she arrived. She had learned to brush Storm properly, and the horse clearly appreciated the special attention from his little protégé. "Storm," she whispered in his ear, "thank you for bringing me to a real family." The horse whinnied softly, as he always did when she talked to him. To Sophia, it was as if he understood every word. Grandma Rose watched from the porch, her heart filled with a happiness she had never experienced before. After decades of wishing for a child to love and protect, she had finally found her heart's daughter. "Joe," she said to her husband, "do you think we deserve so much happiness?" "I think Sophia deserves to have people who would do anything to protect her," he replied, hugging his wife, "and we were lucky enough to be chosen for that mission." As the sun set over the farm, painting the sky with orange and pink hues that made the farm look like a fairy tale setting, Sophia said goodbye to all the guests with warm hugs and promises to keep in touch. Finally, only the family remained: Sophia, Monica, Rose, Joe, and of course, Storm. They sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky. "You know," Sophia said, leaning against Monica as she watched Storm graze peacefully, "sometimes I wonder if Daddy Edward knows what he lost." "What do you think?" Rose asked gently. "I think he lost the chance to know one of the best families in the world," Sophia replied. "But his loss was our good fortune." Grandpa Joe smiled. "You're right, little one. Sometimes bad things happen to lead us to the good things that were waiting for us." That night, after Sophia fell asleep in her warm, safe bed, Monica went out. For a last look at Storm, the horse approached the fence and she gently stroked his muzzle. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't just save my daughter. You gave us a family we never dreamed we'd have." Storm whinnied softly as he always did, and Monica was sure he understood every word. Months later, Sophia began to write in her journal about her experience, with the intention of one day sharing her story to help other children who go through similar traumas. She wanted them to know that even in the darkest moments, kindness can appear in unexpected ways. The last entry in her journal from that special year read, "Today I learned that heroes really exist. Sometimes they have 4 legs and a heart bigger than the world. Sometimes they are ordinary people who do extraordinary things out of love. And sometimes when you least expect it, you discover that you can also be a hero for someone. I am grateful to have been saved, but even more grateful to have learned what it means to be truly loved. Storm brought me home, and now I know that home is not a place. It's where the people who love you are waiting." And so, Sophia fell asleep another night, safe in the arms of a family that chose to love her. protected by a horse who proved that courage comes in all forms, and surrounded by the certainty that no matter how dark the forest may seem, there is always a light waiting to guide us home. The girl who was once abandoned to die had become a young woman full of life, love, and hope. And somewhere, under the stars that shone over the farm, Storm stood guard, eternally fulfilling his silent promise to protect the child who had become the center of a miracle of love and redemption.